Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I just wanted to talk quickly about interviews that are coming out now and kind of the different kind of rhythms that kind of come along with interviews. So I saw this on Reddit and it's from a year ago, and it takes me to this master application, the Google Doc, as it were. And I see that there are some interviews here for 2025. I don't know who's behind the Google Doc, who you would email to get that filled. I can't fill it out right now and so forth. But again, just letting you know, it's reasonable that people are getting interviews now. The virtual usually comes first, or a pre-interview, and then later comes the real interview at the kind of biggest sites, and then other sites are just it's just one interview. So I'm going to give you some resources, free resources. Just go to residency.teachable.com and go on the residency LOI PowerPoint presentation one-on-one help. And you're going to get to this document. So the first thing I want to kind of talk about are the clinical cases. They're going to tell you that there's, certain clinical cases that are going to come up. You may or may not know what type they're going to be. But a lot of times, if you look at who's going to interview you, generally people interview in their area of expertise. So if it's a PGY1, you can go and see what their poster was at ASHP, or you can see what they're most interested in and make sure you're ready with that particular information. Generally, it's going to be site specific. I mean, ambulatory versus critical care, and so forth. Peds, it's a lot of times it's quite, obvious what's going to be, but do take time to figure out who your interviewers are going to be, and that can often tip you off to the kind of topics they're going to do. One thing you'd never want to do though is try to impress somebody, because you might get like somebody who's PGY2 trained B cop coming in and you're going to try to impress them on cancer, and I assure you that will not happen. So again, they just want to see that you're reasonable with your thinking, that you've had some good preparation, that you took the time to get ready for their um, interview. If there's some kind of issues with your whether or not your application actually made it in, I have a template in here that you can just grab that kind of politely says, "Hey, just making sure you got my application." And you say, well, are you bothering them and things like that. Well, let's say you decide to send this to them in February. It doesn't matter if they missed it or not. The interviews are gone. They're done. It's over. Like, so I would lean on the part of caution here and send it out anyway. Residency interview offer acceptance template. The interview starts the minute you email them back. And the what you say, how you say it, and so forth. You may have spent a lot of time on your CV, on your resume, but in your excitement, you want to just send it back, real quick and say, "Hey, of course, I want to take it, and I'll do this time." And what happens is that sometimes some mistakes are in there and so forth, and you want to make sure you're treating that email as if you're actually sending a letter. I have a worksheet here that you can just download. It's for up to 15 interviews. I mean, you could expand it, I guess, if you really wanted to. But someone who had 15 interviews that I was helping, just let me have it. And then API to residency core rotations. This is probably the most important thing that you can do to prepare for the interview, which is to show how you match. So I'll show you what that sheet is if I can get this to work right in terms of capturing this Excel file. But one of the most valuable things you can do is that why do you want to come here? Well, if your CV matches to their offerings really well, that's a darn good reason to want to go there. Now, then you kind of shift and move on to the people, and that, I've whether you met them or didn't meet them, whether you've heard good things, you just, again, want to make sure it goes back to the people are important too. But if take it back to when you were an undergrad. If you want to be an engineering student, you probably go to some college that ends with tech, right? So Georgia Tech would make a lot of sense for an engineering student. Iowa State is a much more of an engineering school than Iowa, and Iowa and so also has the veterinary program. And then on the other end, Iowa's the one with the med school, and so it just kind of is like it should make sense. Like your CV should I should be able to look at your CV and in less than 30 seconds say, this is an ambulatory care pharmacist to be. This is an acute care pharmacist to be. I should be able to know that. And yeah, it's unfortunate if you haven't had the acute care rotation before your interview or you haven't had, the proper ambulatory care rotation. But what you can do is talk about the things that you would be doing in that type of thing. Okay. But let me talk a little bit about these documents. The first one here is one of my favorite people on the planet is Brandon Dyson, who's TLDR Pharmacy, or one of the co-founders of TLDR Pharmacy. And some of these links may not be the most up-to-date ones, but what it does is TLDR Pharmacy has fantastic reviews of things, and they're all free. Like it's the antibiotics, the anticoagulation, CHF, cholesterol, PCSK9s, and so forth. And what this really does is say, okay, let's say you're going to ambulatory care, there is a diabetes rotation, and you've even put in your letter of intent how excited you are about being on a PAC team and working with diabetics and all that stuff. Well, if that's the case, you better darn well be good at insulin and you better know diabetes management. And there's some links here to that for that document. So that's kind of the first thing. Here's the forecasts thing here, dear RPD. Just wanted to just double check that you got my application and you put everything in the subject line. This is my name, this is my school, this is what I'm asking for, because these are very busy people with very full inboxes. You want to make sure that everything they need to find your email again is in that subject line. In terms of confirming a residency interview, it's much more than, yes, I will do it, because you want to make sure that you know what's going on with, okay, let's start with the subject line. Who are you? What school are you from? Okay. Only use formal titles. Don't use first names, even if they're like, oh, call me Jane, call me Joe. Don't do that. Confirm the details. So who's going to be on the call? This will tell you a couple of things. One, like, is this going to be the residents? Is it the actual RPD? You can look up what you can about them and get to know them. Maybe LinkedIn, quick look at those types of things. Some things that you might not think to look for are, did everyone there work in a hospital before they did a residency? Okay. If they did, then you're coming in with your retail experience. You've got to explain to them why it is that you're coming for a hospital position. You've not really worked in a hospital. Appies don't count. So that needs explanation. Or on the other hand, you can say, okay, well, I see that they all have that hospital experience. I have hospital experience too. This is what I did. And sometimes you'll talk about the frustrations with it, and you'll always spin it to a positive light. The next thing is you want to make sure the software they're going to be using, is it going to be a Zoom link or things like that? And then make sure you've got make sure, I've too many Greek tragedies here. Make sure you've got the time zone right, because where are they, in terms of that? And some, like Arizona, are a little bit goofy with time zones. And then, is it virtual? Is it in person? And then sometimes they give you a choice. I would always opt for the in person, because you really can never beat someone out. Well, the first thing is, if you did an appy with them, that's a 5 to 6 week interview. That's, trumps everything. But then an in-person interview versus a virtual interview is certainly, I think, a little bit more impactful as well. But I put I want to confirm this, and this. And then if no one is there, what is the phone number that I should call? So the last thing you want is to get on the Zoom meeting, find out that no one's shown up, and all of a sudden, you're not there. Now, the reason why you especially want to know how long the interview is going to be, because if it's one of those 15-minute interviews where they're just kind of screening you, You want to know how many questions they have because it's going to be 1 minute to open, 1 minute for questions at the end. That means that you only have 13 minutes left. If you have four questions, that means that you've got to keep your answer, right? Four times three is 12. Well, 12, 15. But you want to keep your answers to 3 minutes because they're scoring each question. And if you go long just talking and talking, talking about a question, well, you're not going to get to the last question or the last two questions. So you want to make sure how many questions do you feel that might be, and they'll tell you. It's like everybody's got the same four questions. Everybody's got the same five questions, and it's going to be 15 minutes. And we just want to get to know you, get to see you, all as well with that way. Um, the 50 interviews list again, it's just a worksheet like this is good, this is bad, and so forth. And then the Appy to residency match sheet, I think, is really critical as well. So I think that kind of if you want to make sure that you stand out, which is what you're really doing, you're trying to beat that group. Think of it more like Olympic heats. You know how like in the Olympics, there's like, okay, there's going to be three heats of the 400 meters. Okay, well, let's say there's three interview groups or whatever. You just want to focus on making sure you're first or second in your group, so that you can kind of move on to the next. And that doesn't mean putting down other people. It actually means quite the opposite, which is when somebody says something, you later use that and say, oh, yeah, when such and such applicant was saying this, we had something like that. And it shows that you're listening to them. It shows that you're answering the question. It's a really good thing. But here's one of the things that I think is most valuable to do because they are so different. And to be fair, I did this a little while ago, but like something where like Vanderbilt, like they have so few required rotations. Like it is crazy. And then on the other hand, you've got a couple of others that are just like a ton of required rotations. And what you do is you go in and you're like, okay, these are the ones that I have. These are the ones that I had classes in, and these are the ones that I have gaps. And don't feel like, okay, they have six difficult, very clinical rotations, and you're supposed to have all six in your appies. That's not the case. Residency is going to fill some of those gaps. But what you want to make sure you do is you make clear how you're prepared for the ones that you've had, how you're going to prepare for the ones that you didn't have, and then talking a little bit about why it is that you picked their site. And with Vanderbilt, it might be that I just love the flexibility that you offer in this residency. Whereas, with something like NYU, like you're talking about having very, very few electives, and that you truly want that well-rounded thing that is on that letter of intent, but you truly want a well-rounded experience. But you still want to go into this is what I'm probably going to be doing. Now, word to the wise, they like hearing that if they have PGY2s, that you would be interested in one of their PGY2s. Doesn't mean they have enough spaces for six PGY1s to all take the same PGY2. Of course not. But it is a pain to go through this process again. And man, wouldn't it be nice if they didn't have to go through that. And all they have to do is take this high quality PGY1 and just put them into that PGY2. All will be well. And you might even have a chance to talk to the PGY2 who's like, oh, yeah, yeah, I was here as PGY1 too. Also, but just know that PGY1s tend to be very local. That is, if you go to like a Florida or like a VA, Florida, like Orlando, like it's almost all UF. Like it is extremely hyper local in terms of who they take. When you get to PGY2, it's the melting pot. It's everybody from everywhere because they just want the best PGY1 they can get across the country or PGY2 they can get across the country, and they've got a lot of more time because there's many fewer applicants to look at them. But when you talk about PGY1, just know that if you're going to certain, there's Alabama site that like it's always Auburn, or you go to other places, and it's like always the same one. So you always want to look at where are the residents from, and that kind of gives you a good idea of what your chances are. I've talked quite a bit about how well regarded your school is, and that they may not do it intentionally. It just happens to come out this way. But sometimes they only take, students that from maybe top 10 schools, top 20 schools. And I'm not talking US News and World Report. I'm talking top 10, top 20 in terms of residency match rate, which you would have to do a little bit of work with an Excel file and so forth on the match site, which I've done. And it just, when you look at phase two, it works out to be like the Pareto's principle, where 20%, it actually works out to be closer to 50, but like 20% of the sites get 80% of the phase two rotation because they're like, oh, look, we've got a student from this top school. You can get them in, phase two. This is great. Whereas in the first phase, they're a little bit more lenient with which school you came from. Anyway, let's go back to the residency thing real quick, and or the uh, where you can find all this stuff. So again, if you just want like maybe you're P2, P3, and you just want to kind of try to do this whole thing on your own, just go to the DIY residency prep course that's memorizing 2024 as the $95 coupon. It's a free course. It'll kind of, a lot of schools don't have anything for residency, or they took it maybe in the beginning of their P3 year and it's like too far away. It was too soon. And that'll help you quite a bit. But if you want to kind of figure out the interview process, that's the third one here. And with the interview process, since the LOIs are done, like I help people with their LOIs. If you find that you are concerned about your PowerPoint, I will help you edit that. Again, my undergrad is in English, and basically a few classes away from a degree in mass comm and media studies as well from another college. So I know communication, and I can tell you that the biggest mistake I see on the PowerPoints is sticking too much on one PowerPoint and not really looking at how the group that's in front of you is going to be able to see that PowerPoint, and they're probably not. So I like to always split a lot of those big PowerPoints, where on the first PowerPoint, I would put the question and the case, and then on the second PowerPoint, I put the question, the case, and the answer. So I almost universally say to double the number of PowerPoints you have so that you can double the size of everything that they're seeing. It's even more impressive when you don't have a ton of writing on there, but that doesn't always lend well to these type of presentations. But again, I'll help you with the PowerPoint. A lot of times there's some issues with it. And word to the wise, if you're going to a VA and think that you're going to stick a jump drive into a VA computer and it's going to work, it will not. Those things are guarded like you wouldn't believe. So make sure that when you are bringing a presentation, you physically bring it in paper form for everybody on the jump drive, and then by email to the residency director, whoever is coordinating everything, so they can put it on the computer when you're going to present it. So again, if you got questions, TonyThePharmacist@gmail.com. I just do this because I just know that many of your trainings in rhetoric, logos, pathos, ethos is just not there. My undergrad is in English. It's a liberal arts major, and there's just not enough writing, not enough speaking, not enough of the things that you actually do in real life as a pharmacist. When you're preparing to go to pharmacy school, it's like 90 to 80 to 90% like content, science content. And when you're dealing with people, that's completely different thing, right? So that's really what we want to do. So, all right. Well, I hope this is helpful. TonyThePharmacist@gmail.com if I can help you out at all.